March 3, 1943. As dawn comes up over Port Moresby, New Guinea, Major Edward Larner's hands were steady on his B-25's control column. Mitchell bomber, while he kept an eye on his fuel gauges and listened to the twin Wright Cyclone engines rattle in time with the music. Because his cockpit window was scratched, he could only see 11 more B-25s coming up behind him. It was a tropical morning, and the propellers were making silver circles in the air. What the Japanese convoy coming at them? That people in the Bismarck Sea didn't know was that what people thought they knew about naval warfare would be shattered by a bombing method so risky and out of the ordinary that the general military opinion was that it was almost suicidal. The math behind destruction was, it is about to be written in a new language, not the old language of high-altitude precision bombing. That is measured in feet above the waves. 200 feet. That was the height at. Larner and his squadron would move quickly across the water, between 200 and 250 miles per hour, and attack it. Close enough to taste the salt spray. Up close enough to see how the enemy looked before their bombs went through. The water looked like giants were throwing rocks at it. Japan had set sail from Rabaul. They thought that 8 destroyers and dozens of Zero fighters would keep their convoy safe. They found out that the rules for naval battles had changed for good. The change had started 2 months before in the home of Lieutenant General George Guinea, who was in charge of the 5th Air Force. During 1942, American bombers were shockingly bad at stopping Japanese ships. When flying at safe heights between 5,000 and 10,000 feet, bombers stood helpless as their weapons fell wide of moving ships, making impressive explosions. Geysers of water, but only getting a few hits. The statistics were very bad. One convoy was stopped. Attempt in January 1943, American planes flew 416 missions and only sank 2 ships, but they damaged 3 others. They were the Japanese, resupplying their troops in New Guinea almost without being caught, and the Pacific War was on the verge of ending. Guinea was good at solving problems. He was a fighter pilot in the First World War and was known for doing strange things. Thoughts. He knew that the old way of bombing was not working because ships could move. Stay away from bombs that are dropped from the sky. How long it took for a bomb to go off. At 10,000 feet, captains had almost a minute to turn their ships, making smaller targets visible or steering between the weapons that fall. For the plan to work, bombers had to attack from so low that ships couldn't react in time. But flying within a few hundred feet of heavily armed warships went against every rule for bombers to stay alive. There would be a clear area for anti-aircraft guns to fire from that far away. One hit could instantly destroy an airplane. The risk looked very big. But Guinea had heard of a method that could make everything different. Major William Benn of the 63rd. On October 22nd and 23rd, 1942, the bombardment squadron used skip bombing at Rebel, and it worked well. Using bombs that bounced across the water like flat stones on a pond to attack at night and sink ships. The idea was elegantly simple. If a bomber flew very close to a ship and dropped its bombs at or near high speed and delayed fuses, those bombs would skip across the water and hit or bounce off of the target ship before going off. Ben had shown that the strategy worked in battle, but he died on January 18, 1943. His B-7 went missing over New Guinea before he could make the method for large-scale operations that happened during the day. No one had tried coordinated yet. Attacks from whole squadrons. No one had mastered the changes that had to be made to make it possible for medium bombers to survive at masthead height. No one had taught whole units how to time in split seconds. Needed to successfully skip bombs while under heavy enemy fire until now. The person who designed the changed B-25, Major Paul Gunn, a former naval pilot whose family was stuck in the Philippines when the Japanese came in. Gunn was very angry at the enemy, and he combined the person who made what became known as the Commerce Destroyer was a mechanical genius. While working in Port Moresby's basic maintenance shops, Gunn and his team took apart the bombardier position, was taken off the nose of B-25 Mitchell bombers and 4 forward-firing machine guns with a 50 caliber. In the end, they added more weapons along the fuselage, putting up 8 to 12 heavy machine guns that all fired forward. Because of this, a flying battleship that could attack a target with devastating firepower while getting ready for a bomb run. The guns were used for many things. First, they put down anti-aircraft fire by getting rid of all the gunners on enemy decks. The heavy slugs from 50 caliber guns could get through the hulls of destroyers, knock out gun positions, and cause chaos on target ships. Next, the nose. The pilot could aim the whole plane like a huge weapon with the guns. Not like in high-altitude bombing. A bombardier planned complicated paths. In low-altitude bombing, the pilot had to do the planning. To fly straight at the target and use a simple mark on his windshield as a target for his gun. When the mark lined up, the co-pilot or bombardier set off the bombs with the target ship. The approach was very blunt, and it took steel nerves, but the modified planes were only half the problem. The other half was in shape. Pilots to fly them at dangerously high altitudes and at exact times. Edward Larner was in charge of the 90th Bombardment Squadron when it was put together at the end of December 1942. Larner was a pilot with a barrel chest who was known for flying aggressively and not being afraid of anything. He wore a worn-out. His service cap pushed back on his head. His men knew he was ready to lead any mission he gave him, to get them to fly. Larner's answer when Guinea explained the idea and showed him the changed B-25s was personality trait. His men would follow the rules he set out for them. In January 1943, training began on the SS Pruth, a British steamer that had sunk on the reef has been Nadiera since December 31, 1923. The crews of B-25s practiced diving for weeks. As they rise to 200 feet, they throw practice bombs at the rusting hulk in Port Moresby Harbor. Each plane fell 30 to 40 bombs, learning how to use a mark on the windshield instead of a bomb sight. When one of the crew hit the wreck's mast, and the plane crashed, killing everyone on board. The squadron went to the funeral and then went back to practicing the next day. Larner, because he knew what was at stake, he drove his men hard. The Japanese were making their hold stronger. On New Guinea, building airstrips that could pose a threat to Australia. American and Australian ground troops were fighting a brutal war in the jungle against an enemy that wouldn't give up. Don't fight. Every Japanese ship that got to New Guinea brought more troops with it. More supplies and ammunition that would cost Allied lives to beat. To stop the convoys, they had to be sunk at sea. The 91st Squadron was ready by late February 1943. Was all set. Larner told Guinea that his boys were a cocky bunch who wouldn't. They missed their targets. They had their chance to prove it in just a few days. On the night of February 28, 1943, a Japanese convoy left Rabaul. Intelligence decryptions from Allied codebreakers showed where the convoy was going and when it was likely to arrive. Time. Lay, in New Guinea. 8 transport ships took 6,900 troops who were in desperate need. Needed to make Japanese positions stronger. 8 destroyers were there to protect them. Strong warships with lots of anti-aircraft guns and crews with a lot of experience. The Japanese planners thought that the group would be safe. Along the northern coast of New Britain, they put it to use along storm fronts that would cover it with clouds. They put in charge captains with a lot of experience who knew how to protect convoys. They had planned the trip so that it would be less vulnerable to air attacks from the Allies. Everything was planned to make sure. Good luck. However, the Allies were there to see. Tracking flights kept an eye on the group from the time it left Rabaul. In the afternoon of March 1st, a B-24. Around 3 o'clock, a patrolling Liberator saw the ships through a break in the clouds. The crew sent out the coordinates by radio and the route of the convoys at the headquarters of the 5th Air Force. The information led to a well-thought-out plan. Guinea got his troops together. The first attack would be by heavy B-17 flying fortresses, from a medium height to spread out the convoy and make the ships make maneuvers to avoid them. After that, the real attack would start. B-25s from the 91st Bombardment that had been changed. Squadron, 20 Havocs from the 89th Attack Squadron, and Australian bow fighters, with cannons and machine guns, all attacking at masthead height in waves that would be too much for the enemy to handle. The defenses of the convoy. Japan had to deal with the full force of low-altitude warfare for the first time on this scale. On March 2nd, things got frustrating early on. The convoy was hard to see for most of the day because of bad weather. B-7s sent to attack found just clouds and an empty ocean. But by evening, the sky started to get better. In the morning of March 3rd, reconnaissance crews moved the convoy that was going through the Bismarck Sea to New Guinea, about 50 miles southeast of Finchharan, where the ships were. planners for the Allies thought they would be. Kenny told them what to do. Everything would attack. The fight was about to start. Larner called together his army commanders for the last set of instructions. It was planned that different planes would attack from various heights. At the same time, making things confusing and spreading out the convoy's defensive fire. B-7S would drop bombs from 5,000 to 7,000 feet. Bow fighters would strafe at the level of the wave top. At 200 feet, the B-25s would come in behind the bow fighters and use their forward-firing guns to stop them. They use anti-aircraft fire while dropping their bombs. Larner told his pilots what to do. We're honest. Find your goal. Quick and low, come in. Clear with your guns. Decks. Don't drop your bombs on the hull. Quickly leave. The group would attack in groups of 3 or 4 planes, with wingmen firing support fire while the lead planes focused on bombing. They would attack targets with a beam that was parallel to the length of the ship. This made the target profile look its best, which gives the bombs the best chance of skipping into the hull. Time was very important. Too early to drop the bombs, and the ball would go over the goal. It was too late. The plane would have been right over the ship when the delay happened. Fuse boxes went off, destroying the bomber and its crew. It was measured to find the error margin in tiny bits of a second. The call came at 8:55 a.m. The group had been correctly identified and was in the right range. Larner yelled to his crew, "Cape Ward Hunt 0930, let's go." Go. Made the engines roar to life. B-25s that had been changed started taxiing toward the runway at Port Moresby. 20 crews from the 89th were getting ready to follow behind them. The plan asked all attacking planes to meet up over Cape Ward Hunt at 9:30 and strike at 10 o'clock. As long as B-25 was moved off, he could see the New Guinean coast getting farther away behind him. Going ahead, it was just the ocean, and the Japanese ships didn't know what was coming. It didn't take long to get to the target. Our formation flying was easy at 10,000 feet, and it was easy to see. Larner could see the strike force's other parts getting ready. Heavy B-17s from the 43rd Bombardment Group went up in the air. P-38 Thunderbird fighters set up as top cover, ready to fight any Japanese fighters that came along. Aussie bow fighters are 2-engine planes with 4 20mm cannons on each side, and 6 machine guns were dropped to the top of the wave. Things were starting to fit together, exactly like in the textbook. At 9:55, lead B-17s saw the group. 16 Japanese. On the water below, ships could be seen. Their wakes made white lines across the blue Pacific. There are 8 big trucks, steamed in a line, with 8 destroyers moving around to protect them from enemy aircraft. It was the Japanese captains thought they were ready for any attack because they were such a strong force. At 10 a.m. in particular, the first B-7s started their bomb runs. At 7,000 feet, they let go of a 1,000-pound bomb. Long arcs of bombs fell on the convoy. The Japanese response was strong and quick. Ships that destroy. Transports fired all of their anti-aircraft guns at the enemy. There were black bursts of shells going off. Streams of fire rose up from the tracer points. It took one transport It was a direct hit and started listing right away. One was hit and caught fire, but most of the high. When altitude bombs missed their targets, they sent huge columns of water at the ships that soaked them but did no damage. The captains from Japan breathed better. This was the usual way to bomb. They were able to handle this. Then, it was the bow fighters' turn. 13 bow fighters from the Royal Australian Air Force came from, coming in at masthead height and going over 300 miles per hour through the waves. Japanese soldiers who were trained to shoot down high-altitude bombers were suddenly faced with targets that were moving across the width of their field of fire. Before they could make any changes, they fired their weapons. 20mm cannon shells tore through the destroyer's decks. A lot of machine gun fire hit the decks of transport ships. Heavy cannons could get through armored positions. From Japan, some sailors and soldiers hid behind whatever they could find as the Australian plane flew by, leaving. They leave behind chaos. There were only a few minutes of the bow fighter attack, but it served its purpose. The defensive shape of the convoys started to fall apart. Destroyers getting the torpedo bombers turned their bows on low to the ground to attack smaller targets with bow fighters. This move is standard practice. When torpedoes were used, the transport ships were left with less protection. Larner and his B-25s flew into the chaos. It took the pilots time to choose targets and make plans before Larner's squadron came in from the southeast at 2,000 feet. Attacks happened. He could see the big group of cars below through his windshield. Ships moving all over the place, and smoke rising from ships that have already been hit by the B-17. He chose a big destroyer as his target and moved his control column forward. The B-25 fell toward the ocean in a careful dive. Larner stopped rising at 200 feet and pushed his opens the throttle all the way. The bomber sped up to 225 miles per hour. The ocean surface moving quickly by just below his wheels. He was followed by 3 wingmen who spread out to fight different enemies. Aims 4. Larner put his forward guns in action. Larner fired at 1,200 yards, 850 caliber. The nose of his B-25's machine guns went off, firing streams of half-in. Sent bullets at the destroyer. The effect was terrible. On the Japanese sailors. Deck were cut down right away. Gun positions went off in a hail of sparks, as rounds that could go through armored steel. The bridge windows of the destroyer was broken. On the enemy ship, chaos broke out as gunners tried to return fire while being shredded by American ships. Guns with machine guns. Larner stayed on track like a rock. The line on his windshield that marked the reference point was exactly where the waterline of the destroyer. He called outer ranges at 300 yards, 100 yards, 200 yard. At the exact moment, Larner's bombardier set off 2 500-pound bombs with 5 seconds to spare. Fuse delays. When the bombs fell, they hit the water right away. They didn't go off when they hit something because the fuses were delayed. The bombs instead skipped and bounced off the water's surface like stones moving forward on their own. The first bomb went off it hit the water, bounced once, and then hit the destroyer's hull at the waterline. The second bomb went off next. It hit the water and skipped right under the ship. Larner took back some of his power. The B-25 roared over the destroyer's mast with feet to spare. The gunners in the waist positions kept firing, hitting the destroyer's deck hard as they flew by. 5 seconds after the bombs went off, Larner's B-25, which was about a quarter-mile away. Delay fuses went off. The destroyer was torn apart by 2 explosions. The first, the bomb made a huge hole in the hull right at the waterline. When the second bomb went off under the keel, it broke the back of the destroyer. The ship started to settle right away, and its watertight compartments flooded faster than they could be damaged. The control crews could answer. The people who were working for Larner were doing their attack you. Lieutenant Charles Howe went after a transport ship with his nose guns. He got rid of everyone on the deck before his bombs went off and hit the side of the ship. Captain John Henbury, who was in charge of the second group, kept firing as he got closer to another vehicle. His tracers walking across the top of the ship. One of Henneby's bombs hit its target straight on, hit among the ships. The explosion shook the transport, and fire broke out from its cargo holds. 2 bombs were put into a different vehicle by Lieutenant John Smallwood. Hull, and dropping 2 more on the bow of another ship. All around the group, B-25s were carrying out flawless attacks. The method that was tried out in Rebels' one-off night raids were now working perfectly on a huge scale. The Japanese response was slowed down by how quickly and violently the attack came. Gunners who aim at planes found they hit targets that were right in front of them before they could aim. Fire from a 50 caliber gun from it was almost impossible to man exposed gun positions in B-25s. Sailors who shot and killed people who tried to fight back. The bombs that skipped over water were very dangerous. You could move to avoid high-altitude bombs, but these weapons came in so fast and so low that it was impossible to avoid them. Wasn't possible. When a lookout saw a B-25 coming, the bomber was already there. Already let its weapons go. Captains couldn't do anything as bombs skipped across the water and went straight for their ships. Ships, hitting their hulls with a lot of force before the delayed fuses set off explosives that tore through vital separate areas. After the B-25s came the 12 A-20 Havoc. At the same height as Mostad were light bombers from the 89th Attack Squadron. Major Glenn Clark was in charge of the first group of 6 planes. When they got close to the convoy, Clark saw explosions and bombs from the B-25 hit. He chose a big freighter as his target, and he started to run. At 240 miles per hour and 200 feet, Clark used his forward guns to set off 2 bombs. The weapon skipped. It hit the transport exactly right, setting it on fire. Clark's wing got cut off. The radio mast of the ship as he pulled up and over, but his A-20 could still fly. He went around and could see his target, which was later found to be Thame Maru, on fire, strongly from several hits. It worked just as well for other A-20 pilots who attacked. Captain Ed Chudoba dropped a bomb on the same freighter that Clark had hit, destroying it for good. Lieutenant Jack Taylor and Captain Dixie Dunbar attacked Kembaru, which was the smallest ship in the group. Their bombs went off. Home, and the ship started to sink right away. P-38 flew above the low-level death. Japanese Zero fighters had come to protect the convoy, and Lightning fighters fought them. The battle in the air was fierce, but short. American pilots flying planes that were better than the Japanese fighters in. Speed and firepower were used to shoot down enemy planes in a methodical way. 3. During the battle, P-38s were lost, but their deaths made it possible for the bombers to keep attacking. Interfering with. When Japanese planes did get through to attack the B-25s and A-20s, they found the bombers had a lot of powerful defensive firepower. The American plane had waist gunners and tail gunners who shot back very hard, and bomber defensive fire killed a number of Japanese fighters. By 10:15 a.m., there were only 15 minutes left. As soon as the attack started, all 8 transport ships were hit, and most of them were on fire or sinking. 3 of the 8 destroyers were either badly damaged or already sinking. The Bismarck Sea was full of. There was wreckage, oil slicks, and Japanese sailors getting off the ship. On top of the destruction, the American and Australian flight crews were shocked by what they saw. The method they used, practiced for weeks, had gone above and beyond what was expected. Not only did the low-altitude attacks work, they were totally awful. The convoy that Rabble had left with such confidence was being destroyed one step at a time. The fight was not over, though. The Japanese were very determined, and the destroyers that were still there kept going, getting into fights while nearby cargo ships were on fire. Early that afternoon, Allied. The planes came back to finish the damage. It was the same as the morning's wave pattern that is very bad. B-25s and more B-7 bombers dropped bombs from a medium height, done precise low-altitude runs. 18 transport ships, and there were 3 destroyers at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. The destroyed ship Tokitsukatsi sailed through the night and finally sank on March 4th at sunset. Only 4 destroyers were able to get away. They are Uranami, Shikanami, Asagumo, and Yukazi. These ships were also damaged. The battle killed a huge number of people. Out of the 6,900 Japanese soldiers who had left Rabble for Lely, but only about 1,200 made it to shore. One more. Destroyers and submarines saved 2,700 people and brought them back to Rabble, but a lot of them had lost their weapons and gear. About 2,890 people, soldiers and sailors from Japan, were killed when their ships sank or when they drowned in the oil. The Bismarck Sea's water. The Allies lost a very small amount of soldiers. 13 Americans and the Australian crew on the plane died. 10 people died in battle and 3 died in an accident. 8 airmen were hurt. In battle, 4 planes were lost. 1 B-17 and 3 P-38s. 1 B-25 and 1 bow fighter went down in. 12 Japanese ships were sunk by accidents, killing thousands of enemy soldiers. The exchange rate was almost too good to be true. There was a stir afterward, in it. Some of the people who took part were haunted by it for the rest of their lives. On March 4th, the area where the convoy had been destroyed was searched for survivors by Allied planes and PT boats. The orders were harsh and clear. Hit the lifeboats hard. The machine gun rafts stopped Japanese soldiers from getting to the shore, where they could get new weapons and be sent back into battle. The reasoning was very logical. Each Japanese soldier who got to New Guinea would have to be killed by an American or Australian infantry fighting hard in the jungle. It is better to beat them in the water than to have to fight them again on land. But the people who carried out the order were devastated when it came true. Pilots said they saw 200 flying groups. Survivors on rafts who were told to attack until there were no more survivors. Japan was shot at by PT boats with machine guns all night. The explanation given by American. They pointed to the horrible things the Japanese did and the need for a quick solution. Japanese Zero was hurt in the battle. Fighters had attacked American pilots who had bailed out of a damaged B-17. Double trouble, shooting them as their parachutes let them fall. Soldiers from the Allies fighting in New Guinea had seen Japanese soldiers practice using bayonets on prisoners, eat live animals, and refuse to give up, even if you know you're going to die. The terrible truth about the Pacific War made mercy look like something that neither side could afford. But for the crew of the planes that attacked on survivors, the mission was scary. Some people had trouble remembering for decades. They knew about the military. Of necessity, they had heard about the terrible things the Japanese did. But shooting men who were helpless in the water was wrong. Something very basic about how they think about war. It was General Douglas MacArthur who called the Battle of the Bismarck Sea was the most important air battle of the war in the Southwest Pacific. What he thought was correct. The battle showed that planes on land could attack naval convoys without help from ships on the water, those that carry people. It showed that bombing from low altitude wasn't a desperate last resort, a risk, but a good strategy that could be learned and improved over time. It shut down the sea routes to New Guinea, which was very important. Following seeing after the Japanese destroyed the Lele convoy, they didn't try to strengthen their position in New Guinea again. Guards by ship. Japanese forces on the island were completely cut off from the rest of the world, and they were eventually defeated. It was inevitable. For Edward Larner, who planned and led the attacks, his best moment in the military was the victory. He used a method that had been tried and tested in isolated night raids and practiced it over and over again. Then he led his men into battle, with results that went beyond all expectations. His B-25 crews had hit 17 targets directly. 37 bombs dropped were the right ones, which shows that high-altitude bombing can work. Never reach. Guinea praised Larner and suggested that he be promoted and given a decoration. The 90th bomb launch squadron became famous all over the Pacific theater. Too bad Larner didn't make it through to the end of the war. On April 30th, 1943, an airplane crash killed him less than 2 months after he won the Bismarck Sea battle. Getting to land at WWII airfield, he did the move that made him famous. He dove toward the runway and pulled up sharply into a clothed. The stunt had always been amazing and a little risky, but Larner had done it dozens of times without any problems. This time was different. His B-25 had a lot of stuff on it. With gas, 8 people, luggage, tools, and 2,000 pounds of bombs. When the control column was pulled back at the bottom of the dive, the bomber stopped because it was too full. It went to a flat. It spun, hit the ground, and blew up. Nobody made it out alive. Larner. He left behind a wife and 2 daughters. As a military honor, he was buried in Port Moresby. His fame was protected by those 15 minutes of battle changed naval warfare for good. Captain John Henbury, who was Larner's partner in the attack on the Bismarck Sea, took charge of the 90th Squadron and led it. For the rest of the war, the squadron kept using the skills Larner had honed and sank dozens more ships. Japan's ships all through 1943 and 1944. After working his way up, Henbury became a major general and then the head of the Air Force Association, carrying on the innovative and tough leadership that Larner had shown. The new strategies that were created for the Battle of the Bismarck Sea were used all over the Pacific theater. Besides, other squadrons turned their B-25s into gunships by adding cannons to the nose and machine guns that fire forward. A-20 and B-26 units went to low altitude attacks as normal practice for operations against ships. It even made its way to the Mediterranean theater, which American bombers used against ships from Germany and Italy. The British, who had tried similar strategies early in the war and improved their own after hearing about the success in America. The effect on the Japanese naval forces' minds was very bad. Captains of ships, people who used to feel safe when they were escorted by destroyers and covered by fighters, now knew that attacks could happen against them, and they couldn't avoid or defend well against them. The convoy system that kept Japanese garrisons alive across the Pacific stopped working in places where the Allies took over. Planes that are based on land could work. Japanese planners had to rely more and more on submarines and fast ships. Destroyer runs happen at night, with much less cargo space available. A lot more danger. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea proved that Lieutenant General Kenny had a good plan for the future. His insisting on on modifying conventional bombers for unconventional missions. His willingness to embrace unorthodox tactics and his ability to identify and promote aggressive leaders like Larner proved decisive. Kenny's approach became a model for air power employment in the Pacific. He demonstrated that innovation and adaptation could overcome numerical and geographical disadvantages. The 5th Air Force under his command dominated the skies over the Southwest Pacific, providing the air superiority that made MacArthur's island-hopping campaign possible. The technical lessons were equally significant. Aircraft designers learned that medium bombers could be successfully modified for roles far beyond their original specifications. The B-25 Mitchell, designed as a conventional medium altitude bomber, became one of the most versatile aircraft of the war after being converted into a gunship. The forward-firing armament concept influenced post-war attack aircraft design. The principle of combining suppressive fire with precision weapons delivery became fundamental to close air support doctrine. For the individual pilots and crew members who participated in the battle, the experience was transformative. They had trained for a mission that seemed nearly impossible. They had faced anti-aircraft fire at point-blank range. They had delivered bombs with split-second timing while flying at speeds that left no margin for error. And they had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The confidence gained from that success carried through the rest of their military service. Men who had doubted the tactics before the battle became its most fervent advocates afterward. Crews that had been skeptical about attacking warships at 200 feet became eager for more missions. The 90th Squadron developed an esprit de corps that made it one of the most effective units in the Pacific theater. The statistical analysis of the battle reveals the dramatic effectiveness of low-altitude attacks compared to conventional high-altitude tactics. The B-7 bombers bombing from 5,000 to 7,000 feet achieved approximately a 3% hit rate, consistent with PCM practice, but inadequate against maneuvering targets. The B-25s and A-20, using low-altitude techniques at 200 feet, achieved hit rates exceeding 50%, with some crews scoring hits with every bomb dropped. The difference was attributable to multiple factors. Reduced distance meant less time for targets to maneuver. Horizontal trajectory required less precise timing than vertical drops. Suppressive fire degraded enemy defensive capabilities. And the psychological impact of aircraft roaring over mastheads disrupted enemy response coordination. The development of the technique required solving numerous technical challenges. Bombs had to be equipped with delayed fuses that would survive the initial impact with water without detonating. The fuse delay had to be long enough for the aircraft to escape the blast radius, but short enough that the weapon detonated against or near the target. Pilots learned through extensive practice that releasing bombs from exactly 200 feet at speeds between 200 and 250 miles per hour produced the most consistent results. Deviations of even 20 feet in altitude or 10 miles per hour in speed could cause bombs to sink immediately rather than skip or to skip over the target entirely. The precision required was extraordinary, achieved through hundreds of practice runs and the innate skill of experienced pilots who could gauge altitude and speed by instinct. The modified B-25s themselves represented a remarkable feat of field engineering. Major Paul Gunn and his maintenance crews performed modifications that North American aviation, the manufacturer, had never imagined. The structural changes required to mount additional weapons, the electrical systems needed to fire multiple machine guns simultaneously, the ammunition storage solutions for thousands of rounds of 50 caliber ammunition all had to be improvised. With limited tools and resources, that these field modifications worked reliably under combat conditions testified to the ingenuity and dedication of the ground crews. Many of the maintenance personnel worked 18-hour days keeping the aircraft flyable. They scred parts from damaged planes. They fabricated brackets and mounts from scrap metal. They kept the B-25s in the air through determination and improvisation. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea also highlighted the importance of intelligence and reconnaissance in modern warfare. The Allied victory was possible only because Costa Ricans had revealed the convoy's route and destination. Reconnaissance aircraft had located and tracked the ships despite bad weather. Communication systems had coordinated attacks by multiple squadrons across vast distances. The integration of intelligence, reconnaissance, and strike capabilities demonstrated the evolution of warfare into an increasingly technological and information-dependent enterprise. The Japanese convoy failed not because its commanders were incompetent, but because every aspect of its mission had been compromised by superior Allied intelligence gathering and exploitation. In the broader context of the Pacific War, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea marked a turning point in the struggle for New Guinea. Japanese forces on the island, already under pressure from Australian and American ground forces, found themselves cut off from reinforcement and resupply. The garrison at Lae, which the destroyed convoy had been intended to reinforce, fell to Allied forces 6 months later in September 1943. The Japanese defensive perimeter contracted inexorably as island after island fell to American amphibious assaults supported by overwhelming air power. The air superiority that made these invasions possible was built on the foundation laid at the Bismarck Sea. The battle demonstrated that Allied forces could dominate not just the skies, but also the seas around contested territories through innovative application of land-based air power. The human dimension of the battle deserves remembrance. Beyond the statistics of ships sunk and aircraft lost were individual stories of courage and sacrifice. The B-17 crew, who bailed out of double trouble only to be machine-gunned by Japanese fighters while dangling helplessly in their parachutes. The P-38 pilots who went down fighting to protect the bombers. The Japanese sailors who stayed at their posts firing anti-aircraft guns even as their ships disintegrated around them. The Allied air crew who flew mission after mission knowing that a single mistake at 200 feet meant certain death. War demands courage from all participants, and the Battle of the Bismarck Sea witnessed extraordinary courage on both sides. The controversy over attacks on survivors has never been fully resolved. Military historians generally accept that the decision was militarily justifiable within the context of total war in the Pacific. Every Japanese soldier eliminated at sea meant lives saved among Allied ground forces who would otherwise have faced those soldiers in combat. Given Japanese tactical doctrine that emphasized fighting to the death and made surrender almost unknown, allowing survivors to reach shore guaranteed more casualties later. Yet the ethical dimension remains troubling. Attacking helpless men in the water violated codes of military honor that dated back centuries. The pragmatic argument that Japanese forces would have done the same and had done worse does not fully address the moral complexity. Some participants struggled with the memory for the rest of their lives, while others maintained that they had simply done what war required. Modern military analysts studying the Battle of the Bismarck Sea identify several key factors that contributed to Allied success. Tactical innovation driven by operational necessity solved the problem of hitting maneuvering ships. Realistic training prepared crews for actual combat conditions. Combined arms coordination used different aircraft types in complementary roles. Excellent intelligence provided targeting information and enabled mission planning. Technological adaptation modified standard aircraft for specialized roles. Each factor was necessary. Together they were sufficient for victory. The battle serves as a case study in how innovation, training, intelligence, and combined operations can overcome numerical or technological disadvantages. Edward Larner's legacy extends far beyond his short life. His willingness to embrace an unconventional tactic and his skill in training men to execute it saved countless Allied lives. Every Japanese soldier who died in the Bismarck Sea was one less enemy that American or Australian infantry would face in the jungles of New Guinea. Every ship sunk represented one less cargo of weapons and ammunition that would kill Allied soldiers. The technique Larner perfected became the standard for anti-shipping operations throughout the Pacific War. Thousands of Japanese vessels fell to low-altitude attacks over the following 2 years. The maritime supply lines that Japan needed to sustain its far-flung empire were systematically severed by aircraft, flying at altitudes that conventional wisdom had deemed suicidal. In reunions held decades later, veterans of the Bismarck Sea battle spoke of the mission with a mixture of pride and wonder. Pride in their accomplishment, wonder that they had survived. The 15 minutes of combat at Mostad altitude, flying through walls of anti-aircraft fire, delivering bombs with split-second precision, had been the most intense experience of their lives. Many compared it to flying through hell itself. Yet they had emerged victorious, their tactics validated, their courage proven, their place in history secured. The principles validated at the Bismarck Sea remain relevant to contemporary military operations. Innovation can overcome conventional limitations. Realistic training prepares forces for actual combat. Integration of different capabilities achieves combined effects greater than the sum of their parts. Adaptation of existing systems meets new requirements faster than waiting for perfect solutions. Intelligence exploitation provides decisive advantages. These lessons learned in the skies over the Bismarck Sea 80 years ago continue to inform military planning and execution. The names of those who fought are fading from memory, but the principles they validated through blood and courage remain relevant to every generation that must defend freedom. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea stands as one of the most decisive engagements in the Pacific War. A Japanese convoy that should have reached its destination safely was instead completely destroyed by innovative tactics executed with extraordinary skill. The technique that accomplished this victory was considered nearly suicidal by conventional military wisdom. Edward Larner and his men proved that conventional wisdom was inadequate. They flew at altitudes that invited destruction, dropped bombs with timing that allowed no margin for error, and achieved results that exceeded every expectation. 12 Japanese ships sank into the Bismarck Sea. Thousands of enemy soldiers died. The route to New Guinea was closed, and the course of the war shifted irrevocably toward Allied victory. All in 15 minutes of combat that demonstrated the power of courage, innovation, and determination. The forbidden tactic became the standard. The dangerous method became routine. The impossible mission became a template for countless successful attacks. Edward Larner did not live to see the final victory in the Pacific, but his contribution to that victory was immeasurable. The pilots who followed him into combat at 200 feet carried his legacy forward. The tactics he perfected sank hundreds of Japanese ships over the following 2 years. The courage he exemplified inspired thousands of air crew who faced similar dangers. His name deserves to be remembered alongside the great innovators of military history, the leaders who changed warfare through vision and daring. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was his masterpiece, and its lessons echoed down through the decades to inspire new generations who must face new challenges with the same combination of innovation, training, courage, and determination that characterized those 15 minutes over the Pacific in March 1943 when everything changed.